Erev Tov, everyone. Shavua Tov. So I'm going to take advantage to use a bit of free advertising here for the first minute. But we have the Summa B'Rabbanan Shiur on a Sunday morning, as many of you attend, either in person or on Zoom. Those who can't make it, we have Zoom, but it is better in person. But we're just starting a new topic. For the last few months, we've been studying the laws of Hilchot Shabbat. We've completed our study of the laws of Zachoret Yom HaShabbat. We now want the laws of Shamoret Yom HaShabbat. In other words, the Melachot. And we're moving on from next week. We're going to be discussing the laws of Bishul, of cooking. So lots of very, very practical, relevant issues which come up. If anybody has, by the way, if anybody has particular questions, I know there are questions that come up all the time, but particular questions related to Bishul and Shabbat, feel free to send those in. You can email me, you can WhatsApp me, and we'll address those in the Shiurim. But this is an invitation for everybody to come. Even if you haven't been part of the Shiur, we don't discriminate. You can come, you can join at any point. No background is necessary, and it's 45 minutes to an hour study of Hilchot Shabbat every week. That is on a Sunday morning at 10 a.m. Okay. Parashat Balak. So there's very interesting, there's a Hasidic vort related to Parashat Balak that the Aftarav used to say that the mitzvah of Ahavta l'reacha kamocha, of Avat Yisrael, is so fundamental to the Torah, it's so fundamental to everything that it can be found in every single parasha in the Torah. Every parasha in the Torah contains this tenet of Avat Yisrael. So once a Chassid came up to him and he said, Parashat Balak, I mean, most of the parasha isn't even, we don't even appear by Am Yisrael, but the whole story is about Bilam trying to curse Bnei Israel. It's about Balak, the king of Moab, again, trying to defeat Bnei Israel. So he said, where do you find Avat Yisrael? Where do you find the mitzvah of Avat Yisrael, the parasha of Balak? So the Rav said to the Chassid, that's easy, Balak. It's already there in that. I told you it's a Hasidic story. He said it's already there in the name of the parasha. He says, you look at the word Balak, is Roshei Tevot. Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Bet ve'ahavta lamed l'reacha kuf kamocha. Right? So the Chassid laughed why you all just did. And he said, but Rav, with all due respect, that's not how you spell ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Right? If it was a vav, and if it was a chaf and not a kuf, I could understand, but come on. So he said to him, my dear Chassid, he said, you're going to be that exacting with the letters. You're going to be that precise on the points. You'll never reach Avat Yisrael. That's the. So it's not just for the vote, but it's. I think it's a true idea. It's a very nice. I always think of that when we get to this parasha. Unfortunately, in the world that we're in today, it's something which is particularly relevant. I just came back. I mentioned downstairs on Shabbat. I mentioned that I just came back from England, so I was in London for a few days last week. It's good to be back. And one of the things, everybody asked me in London, said, what's going on? They said, we hear the news from Israel. We see what's going on. The one thing everybody wants to know, the truth is, a lot of people in Israel ask the same thing, which is, why are we going back? It's like after October 7th, there was such unity, there was such achdut, it was so wonderful. Everybody was in it together. And now everything's gone back. Everything's the way it was. Everything's back to October 6th. That's the perception people seem to have in Chutz La'aretz. I didn't do a scientific study, but the number of people who said that to me was, everywhere I went, that's what they said. They said all the achdut's gone. Why? Because all they see is what's on the media. I think that my answer was, you may agree or disagree, but I said to them, I don't think anything's further from the truth. I said it's true that there's a certain rhetoric you hear. Unfortunately, people spend a lot of time on the internet and on the news. And there's a certain rhetoric that you hear, but the after is still there. I think for the vast majority of the people, yes, there's this and that, there's protests, whatever, we see them. But most people still feel the same way. We don't feel the way we felt on October 6th. I think far more people feel the way we felt on October 9th. I think that Avat Yisrael is still there, it's still in the air, but we have a job in order to amplify it and in order to spread that message and in order to show and to prove that it does exist. So there's something else, something related, which is very interesting, comes up in our parasha. It says, Bilam goes around trying to curse the Jewish people. He doesn't manage every time he tries to curse. He ends up saying a bracha, right? Gets different words, the words which are put into his mouth. And at a certain point, he utters the following phrase. He says, Tamot nafshi mot yeshalim uti achaliti kamo. Bilam, this wicked prophet of the non-Jewish nations, realizes, he says he wants to end, or at least his end should be good. At least his end should be different. And he says, Tamot nafshi mot yesharim. I want to die like the yesharim, like those who are Yashar. And this Chazal tell us is a reference to the Avot, it's a reference to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And he says, Uti achariti kamo. May not have lived my life that way, but maybe my death will be that way. What exactly is Bilam asking? Why is it, and why specifically Mot Yesharim? Why is that the adjective which he chooses? Why is that the superlative here? So we've mentioned this before, but it bears repeating, particularly in the political and social climate that we're in today, which is the introduction of the Netziv on Sefer Breshit. Netziv of Volozhin has as an introduction in his commentary of Hamek Davar, where he begins, before he begins his commentary on Sefer Breshit, and he says the following. I'll read it inside. He says, Sefer Nikra Sefer Breshit. Going back, you'll see he quotes our pasuk, which is why I thought of it now. He says, Nikra b'fi Anavim Sefer Yashar, Kedita Mesechet Avodat Kochavim, Mashne Mekol b'Sefer Yoshua, Lo Iktuval Sefer Yashar. We find in different places throughout Tanakh this phrase of Sefer HaYashar, the book of the straight, upright, honest. Difficult to translate these words always. But we find a number of places in the Navi referred to Sefer HaYashar, and there are a few different opinions in Chazal as to what specifically Sefer HaYashar refers to. But says the Netziv, he says one of the opinions is that it's Sefer Bereshit. Sefer Bereshit is called Sefer HaYashar. I know we're in Bamidbar, but he says it's Sefer HaYashar. It's called Sefer Yashar because of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the Avot, who were called Yesharim. And he quotes the pasuk from our parsha, Shneimar, Tamot nafshi mot Yesharim. So says Bilam, right? Saying Yesharim, referring to the Avot. So says the Netziv the following. He says, Yesh להבין הטעם, למה קרא בלעם את אבותינו בשם ישרים בייחוד, ולא צדיקים או חסידים וכדומה. He says, you're looking for a way to describe these most holy, the most pious people ever to have lived. So what's the word that you're going to use for them? They were honest. They were basically good, yashar, upright. He says, you can do better than that. You can call them chasidim. You can call them tzadikim. He doesn't even call them tzadikim. He calls them yesharim. So what does that mean? He says, why is that the name that's used for the sefer? It is Bilam. Particularly what it was said about Yesharim, that's what Bilam Dafn. So then he takes us back to another place, another pasuk. He takes us forward to another pasuk that uses the word Yashar. It says the Netziv historically is referring to a particular period in Jewish history, which is the time of Beit Sheni. And he says the Inyan as follows. He says in Shirat HaZinu, so we have the pasuk that says Asur Tamim Po'alo, etc., and then it says Tzadik v'Yasharu. That word Yashar again is used no less in a description of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, description of Hashem. But in what context? He says this phrase is used. Shevach Yashar ne'emar latzdik din HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chuban Beit Sheni. So that word Yashar meaning Hashem is Tzadik v'Yashar. Why is he Yashar? That is the same way somebody dies and we say Baruch Dayan Ha'emet. Right? So that's Tziduk Adin. This is the Tziduk Adin, so to speak, in the Chumash, relating to the period of the Churban. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought about the Churban, allowed it to happen, and that is called Yashar. In other words, and he goes on and explains that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Yashar, but that was a generation which was not Yashar. That was a generation, he calls them Dor Ikesh Uptauto, right? This wayward and deviant generation. And why? So he continues. He says, Beit Sheni was not like the times of Beit Rishon. Right? Yoma tells us, Beit Rishon, first Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. Why? 3 cardinal sins, Yaregu V'Yavor, right? Shfichut Damim, Gilui Arayot, Avodah Zarah. Beit Sheni was not like that. He says, when it comes to Beit Sheni, Pirashnu, Shayut Tzadikim V'Chasidim V'Amlei Torah. You were looking for those words. He says, Tzadikim V'Chasidim Amlei Torah. That was the description of the Jewish people in Beit Sheni. But what? So where does the Churban come from? He says, however, Lo Hayu Yesharim B'Lifot Olamim. They were not Yashar. When it came to their conduct, Ben Adam L'Chavero, they were not Yashar. They were crooked. Okay, מפני שנאת חינם שבליבם זה את זה, חשדו את מי שראו שנוהג שלא כדעתם ביראת השם. It was at time you had all these different factions within the Jewish people, and anybody you saw somebody who was a little bit different to you. They had a different color kippah. Maybe they wore a kippah instead of a hat, right? Maybe they had a hat instead of a kippah. Maybe they voted for a different political party, whatever, right? They saw Anybody who's not exactly like me, anybody who doesn't say the same thing as me, anybody who doesn't go to the same hafkana that I go to, right? So he's a tztuki. He's not bikores. He can't be. He's outside the machaneh. He can't be within the fold. It couldn't be. They couldn't accept the fact that you could live with somebody who has differences of opinion with you, but it still follows the ways of the Torah. Is still part of the Jewish people, and that through that, he says ultimately they came. That was the root. That was the source, but it was that lack of yashrut, that lack of just honesty of being. Again, it's very clumsy to translate the word yashar, but that crookedness, that lack of being straight in terms of deep. Sefer Bereshit. The contrast there is the Avot, Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, and he goes on and he gives examples. But he says, even you look at their halichot olam, you look at the way, you look at their midot, you look at their derech eretz, you look at the way that Abraham, for example, davened for the people of Storm. Even though, and he writes remarkable language. He says, even though he hated them, he hated their ways, he hated what they stood for, their wickedness, but nonetheless, he wanted them, he wanted them to improve their ways. He didn't want an entire city to be wiped out. So too, he gives examples of Yitzhak and Yaakov, etc. He says that's what it means to be Yashar. And that's what Bilam davens for as well. Bilam says, okay, I'm not going to be a Chassid, I'm not going to be a Kadosh, I'm going to be a Tzaddik. Bilam understands that. But to be somebody who desires the annihilation, the elimination of an entire nation, of the Jewish people, that even he could recognize, he says, that is not Yashar. That is what is lacking. And therefore, Bilam says, Tamot nafshi mot Yesharim. So that is something which... unfortunately, is relevant, is topical all the time. As I say, we've mentioned it before. That is the idea of the Netziv. Very, very relevant. Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook, who was the son of Rav Kook, was a Rosh Yeshiva in Merkaz Arav. He always used to quote this Netziv. And whenever there were different machlokot and different arguments going on and different, all sorts of these divisive issues happening in Eretz Israel, so he would always go back and say, go back to basics. Remember the Netziv. Remember the Aleph Bet. Before anything else, everybody stands for their ideology. Everybody should fight for their ideology. That's fine. But first and foremost, we have to be Yashar. We have to be Yashar one to another. We have to be Yashar one to the wider world. Bezrat Hashem, in that way, we'll achieve that Avat Yisrael that's alluded to in the beginning of the name of our Pasha. Rabbi Chananya ben Akash,